I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one, it's going to be amazing. I mean, at this point in time, he is retired technically, so formerly of Copenhagen Wolves, TSM, Origen, Fnatic, 100 Thieves, Misfits. I think I got most of them there. I got most of them. That was actually pretty good.
We don't need more. Yeah,
that was pretty good off the top.
The rest doesn't really matter.
That's pretty good off the top. So here's the thing. I actually want to start in your case, because if people don't know, I don't think people actually understand how old school you are, Amazing, because maybe some people, like obviously some people are going to associate you with TSM for the brief time you were there, but actually they'd have to be a ULCS fan, which is what LEC used to be called, to know like Copenhagen Wolves before that. And I doubt actually people know you played in season 2, because a funny detail, I often say this just because it sounds funnier than it is, because you have to realise it's not like we were actually going to the events and like see each other and stuff, but like technically me and Amazing were in the same organisation in 2012 to 2013. Basically, the time he was in a team called Team Acer, and I'll just explain briefly, because what makes it unusual is this. I know obviously people are going to go, Acer, isn't that like a computer brand or a laptop brand? Yeah, that's what was weird about this team, because essentially it wasn't actually like officially like Acer itself, the company. It was essentially like a German esports org, sort of like white labeled itself to be sponsored by Acer, and then we sort of like represented Acer in esports, if you know what I mean. But it was very much at the time based in Germany. Loads of the players were German. Yep. In fact, this team was primarily German, if people don't know. So Amazing played in this team, and this is in like season 2, so it's right when League of Legends. I know, because it sounds like it should be season 1. Season 1 basically was like amateur, if you're being realistic. Season 2 is when it goes, I would say, like semi-pro, because this is when all the big orgs were starting to pick up the big teams, and there was starting to be salaries, but it wasn't anywhere near the levels of later where people are getting millions, and, you know, like people have heard stories of Bjergsen's contract and stuff in the LCS. This was way before this. This was when League of Legends was starting to compete with, you know, StarCraft 2 and Counter-Strike and the other big games at the time. So what I would ask is this, Amazing, is in this era when you played for Team Acer, was it one of those stories like a lot of people who were really old school, where you were just a guy who just played on the ladder in season 1 and pre-season of League of Legends, you were just a good League of Legends player? Were you actually trying to be like a pro player already?
No, I mean, I kind of started following like the professional scene a bit when I tuned into HotshotGG and like Reginet, and like when TSM started to pick up. So for me, like I knew it was there, but I didn't really think too much of it. I was a bit of an M5 fanboy, but it's like not my aspiration to be a pro. And suddenly I get a message from a Acer member, was Sharps at the time. He was team captain, and he just asked me to try out for his German Acer team. And I was like, well, I'm going to do that. And then we hung out. We had a bit of a tryout, I guess solo queue tryout, and suddenly I was on a salary team for the end of 2012. It's pretty interesting.
Right. One thing I would ask is this: when you say there you were like an M5 fanboy, since you're a jungler, were you a fan of Diamondprox? Of
course. I mean, even now, I can still say that I consider myself a fan, because when I started playing, I didn't understand anything about the jungle. I didn't understand anything about lanes whatsoever. But when I saw M5 play, I knew that they were doing something special. So when I actually got to the point where I could compete against Diamondprox, I was fanboying him every single time I played against him in the ladder, while flaming him and vice versa. So it was quite...
That was what I was going to ask, though, because the problem is, like, basically, if people don't know, I don't know if it's a Russian thing, but it's a similar story in the game Quake, right? In Quake, one of the most legendary players ever is Cooler, the dual player, right? But because he's super old school, everyone starts off when they're a pro as like a fan of his, like, oh my God, it's Cooler. But the part is, this is what they don't remember, is to be a fan, cool. But if you play against him, he's going to be shit-talking you next. So, like, if people don't know, Diamondprox is mad spicy. I bet you'd be, like, mad disrespectful if you played someone you didn't know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was like we had this meta in season 2 when we used to invade one another. So level 2, you had to invade enemy red buff, or level 1 even, right? And you didn't have any wards to cover, so you kind of like just coin flipped every single game. And every time you died in the jungle, the enemy jungler was, I mean, effing whatever. You just like he was he's a dick, he's something like that. He was a I can't believe you do this. You know, you have to resolve the cheap tricks, but obviously in a different kind of mana, like I cannot keep PC,
Sure.
But there was this high-low trio of like 3 junglers. It was me, Shook, and Diamondprox, and like every single game was the same thing. And like
This must be the most toxic trio of players imaginable.
it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. The way that we interacted was like, yeah, it was so toxic. Yet there was like you kind of knew that you respect, like at least like knew that the other player was good, right? He knew it, but you just had to do it for the memes, right? And everyone was apparently, let's say, of lower IQ as soon as he was on the enemy team, right?
Yes. By the way, one thing as a sort of an abstract point to draw out from this is one thing. I'm also, I will admit to this day, a massive Diamondprox fan. If people don't know, he's even one of the people where like I was never disappointed because I did 3 interviews I think with him in my career. One was when he spoke no English at all, and it had to be 100% through a translator. The one in the middle was when he'd had a few years where like he'd gotten sort of comfortable in English. And all I'll say is the last one I did, it must be like 4 or 5 years ago now. But if people go and look it up on this channel, it's when his English is fully fluent. And all I can tell you is like he is a guy where like it was only like broken English and stuff that was making him sound like he was saying like weird stuff. Like if you actually understood what he was saying, he was a mega eloquent guy. He really was like you'd hope like a super sort of like. I mean, the funny thing is, I know he comes from like a chess background as well. He is a guy who thought about the game that way. He had his own philosophy on how you play League of Legends. So what I wanted to spin this out into is, I get the vibe you have a similar sense because when I came into League of Legends, one thing I was really shocked by coming from games like Quake and StarCraft and Counter-Strike was that people thought there was one way to play the game and that everyone should do this like one best way. So in the case of jungling, people even thought like everyone should do the most efficient path, for example, or in this era that obviously Diamondprox came along, everyone should just like farm up for gold or whatever the fuck, like. So one thing I've noticed about your career in general is it feels like you're one of the players who is from that European mindset of like, you should play to your style, you should figure out your own strengths, and no matter what the meta is supposed to be, if your strengths are go counter to it, it's sometimes better to just be the odd one out, right?
I mean, yeah, I think for me it was always, I took inspiration obviously from other teams too, because I always tried to emulate and understand what they were doing. But to me, it often came down to it, like, what can we do as a team, right? Like, who are we? What is our identity? If we couldn't play early game, well, then we literally just couldn't play early game, right? That's what it is. So you had to get away from that, even if the meta was defined by early game. If you couldn't play late game, then, well, you had to kind of band-aid it by playing heavy into the early game, right? So depending on the team, like throughout the years, and like especially at the beginning of League, I would say in season 2, 3, 4, 5, like I think most of the teams that I was with were kind of defined by just all-inning on a certain style based upon like the player's strength at hand, right? I didn't try to redefine them. I didn't try to like change them too much. I just tried to help them orchestrate in a certain way. And if that was like odd by the meta standards, that so be it. But it had to be something where we felt comfortable with it, right? So that was kind of my goal in most of my teams in the beginning of my career.
One of the players in this Acer team I did want to ask about, actually, because even though now no one's going to know the name unless they're super old school, at the time he was a very relevant player. It was obviously the mid laner. Another German player was CitizenWayne. He was considered quite a skilled player at the time. In fact, I'd even heard there was all rumours where like he was maybe going to be in like that. I think they were going to, didn't they make like a Na'Vi team briefly or something when he was in like Korea? So I know at one point in time he was like a hot prospect. So who was this guy? I know he didn't have a very long career, but everyone back then was telling me like this guy's the shit.
He was quite interesting. I mean, he was obviously older than me, and he kind of had a different approach to gaming and life, I would say, than I think anyone in esports at the time had. Like, we had all the nerds, I would say, with like, like Progan, me, like the entire CLG.EU team, then the entire M5 team, like every single player at the time was a nerd. When CitizenWayne came into the scene, he didn't really sound like a nerd. He didn't look like a nerd.
He's a very charismatic guy, right?
Yeah, he was really charismatic, and he was able to. He didn't really care that much about playing. He played 3 to 4 hours a day, and oftentimes couldn't even scrim because he was busy with real life stuff like studying and whatever it is at the time. And he made the call for himself very early on that he didn't believe that esports was going to take off or it's going to be worthwhile. Okay. And he thought of other things as more important, which makes sense for him. But he kind of had the same style as Froggen, I would say is the best comparison. Very farm heavy, very like he played Karthus, he tried to play Lux once in a while. He thought that was good. Gragas, those were kind of his champions. And he might have been my harshest critic when I joined the team. because I might have been a bit disrespectful, but that's what it is. But he also didn't really feel like that I was very good because I didn't understand the competitive style at the time, right? Okay. So when he had junglers like Arene, who he was familiar with, I think they played together for quite some time. Like he thought of him as like really, really good at the time. And I was just a solo queue jungler who didn't understand the meta and who didn't understand the macro game of a competitive game. And it kind of actually helped me reframe my thinking to a large degree, because if someone who already played on Navi, who was already in Korea, who played versus Korean teams, was telling me that I was like kind of shit at the game, it did help me to kind of understand that, man, like there's a difference between solo queue and competitive. Obviously something translates, but I'm not performing as well as even like someone who were the rivals at the time. I guess I wasn't performing as well as Diamondprox, even though I was in the same elo. Obviously, I was not on his level. I wasn't performing as well as even someone like, I mean, yet there were so many small teams.
There's
like,
loads of people back then. Linak, Snoopy, Arena, like you say.
Yeah, Snoopy. I wasn't like I was excited when we played Snoopy in scrims, and I was kind of able to play against him, beat him for a couple times. But as soon as they got into practice, for example, like I was suddenly so far behind what they were doing, I didn't even understand what they're doing because I was so solely focused and CitizenWayne was the one that was actually able to call me out and kind of tell me, hey, dude, you're kind of playing shit. I don't know what you're doing. You don't understand the game. And it helped me rephrase it to a certain extent, because then afterwards I understood, hey, there's something different to it, and I don't even have the vision for it yet.
So when you're saying it like this, right, actually it's funny because if people don't know, you've always made this public. I think it was famously you even did like a little like featurette on it when you went to America. You're obviously a big fan of Kobe, the basketball player, right? It sounds like essentially when you came into league, you had an experience like him, because if people don't know, the whole thing about him was he really did believe he was better than his years. And even though he was like made to be benched and stuff when he started out, he had like that brash sort of like, I'd almost say like beginner's mindset of like, fuck everyone before me. Like I could be good and I could be the best now. Were you a bit of a brat when you first came in?
I think that, yeah. I mean, not just when I first came in. I think that lasted for a couple of years.
Okay, fair enough.
Into my TSM days even. But yeah, I was convinced that my way of playing was the right way of playing, because I was able to sustain a higher elo than all of my teammates, right? Like I was the only one that was kind of above 2.8k elo at the time. So, and that was like basically top 10, top 20. While my teammates were hovering around 2.5k, 2.4k. But what I didn't understand is that, these people play like a fraction of what I play, right? So they didn't have the amount of games. So my elo was kind of inflated by the amount of games I was playing compared to everyone else. But also that I was playing in a way that was very volatile and didn't really understand what the ramifications were, right? So the structure of the game was eluding me entirely, right? The only thing I could do was basically make a level 2 gank, like level 2 play in the enemy jungle happen, maybe clear and then look for a gank randomly, whatever it is, clean up kills. So these kind of dynamics that weren't really structured in a way that, I'm going to plan to make this play happen at level 3. I'm going to make a plan to make this play happen at level 4. I'm going to take this first drag. I'm going to do that. I didn't have that in my game at all. And I thought it was so unimportant. I didn't really think about it, that I kind of like put my elbows out left and right all the time and alienated a lot of players through that. And CitizenWayne might have been one of those players that I kind of like, bumped into a bit much. But I think it was good to kind of have that back and forth early on, because it humbled me. I guess it really humbled me, especially going to the first events. Our first event was.
I want to ask about this, so let me set it up.
Yeah, sure.
You had also a very unusual first event, which is what you're about to talk about. So I want to ask about this because it's actually one of the events no one remembers. Now, what's funny is I know this event because actually in Counter-Strike, this event series was a big deal because it always used to be held in originally Korea and then eventually China, right? And so it used to be called the World Esports Games, then it became called the World Esports Masters. So because I was coming purely from games like Counter-Strike, I'd actually been to this event a few times in past years. So I knew like it's good prize money. They try to invite a bunch bunch of Western teams. If people don't know, back then the whole point was they used to just pay for your whole accommodation. Like you would get flown over. It was like, and at the time, this is still back when, this is early League of Legends, obviously. This is when people haven't been international that much. You know, if you're European, you've stayed in Europe. If you're American, you've stayed in America.
Yeah.
Like, this is like, the reason I always bring up these stories is it's not like it was the best tournament ever, but I'm sure it was a unique experience because basically you went to China, and in China there was a very mixed field where they had like Incredible Miracle, which is some of the Korean players, some really old school Korean players that people don't know. World Elite was there, who obviously at this time, by the way, actually was in theory like the best team in the world. This is where they had Wei Zhao and fucking Messiah and all those classic players. There was obviously Curse for St. Vicious and those guys who you managed to beat. You played some other random Chinese team. You also played against, as well as WE, IG was the other big Chinese team, if people remember, with Zitai and PDD. These are all like iconic Season 2, Season 3 names. So what was this experience? For your first LAN, this must have been a really alien experience, mate.
It was really insane. I was just practicing at home, so my parents kind of knew what I was doing, but they didn't understand the scale of it, right? And I didn't understand either, right? So I just came downstairs. It was like 7, 8 p.m. In the evening. I told them, I need a passport. They're like, why do you need a passport? I'm going to China. What are you going to China for? Like, kind of like they kind of like didn't even believe me. I didn't even believe what I was saying. And I was just like, I were invited to a League of Legends tournament in China, and I'm gonna go. Like, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? So we kind of had this discussion for a bit, and at some point they're just like, okay, I mean, whatever, you know, I'm just gonna get you a passport, right? So I got my passport and then sent it over to Shaps for him to get my visa going, because you have to get a Chinese visa to get there. And like the whole process was surreal. I flew. Where did I fly out from? We all met in Frankfurt, and then we flew out from there. And we arrived in China, and we had to take this 2 to 3 hour bus from Shanghai.
I think this must have been in the same place I went to. Was it in Hangzhou, the actual tournament? Because basically what you're talking about, the problem is if you go to, I think it's Shanghai, this actual city is miles away. So what happens is you arrive, and this is, like I said, this is early on in your career, so maybe you wouldn't know this. But normally when you arrive, you take like a 20-minute ride to the hotel. But when you get to this event, I remember this, dude, because the same thing happened to me. When you arrive, they don't tell you you're about to go on a 3-hour bus journey. They just go get into this bus. Exactly. So like, put it this way, all I'll tell you is this, mate. I even didn't go to the toilet before I got on. And I remember I literally halfway through this trip being like, excuse me. And there's just some guy who didn't speak any English, like, no, like, all right, well. And so, yeah, you know, it's mad. You're just getting taken out in the middle of nowhere, aren't you? Like, where the fuck am I going?
Like, the only thing I saw is like, because we're in the bus, and like, I'm with teammates that I've never met in my life. Like, I don't know.
Oh, right.
We didn't have webcams at the time even, right? Like, so we only over TeamSpeak, right? So I meet them, and it's like, so some of them are a lot older than me. Then we had, I guess, a pretty diverse group of players, because we had like, Shaps was like 27 already at the time, or 26, so he was a bit older. He was already pretty mature. Then we had CitizenWayne. Then we had Liumi, who was, I don't say flamboyant, but he was kind of like outgoing in a different sense. And then we had Man, who was Violet Lord, who was really toxic in solo queue, really known as a toxic player, but then was like kind of like this open person in real life, like emotionally open, whatever it is. And it was kind of really just interesting to meet them. And I felt like the odd one out, because I've never been to a different country to that extent, at least. Like, I've been to the Netherlands. I've been to, maybe I've been to 2 to 3 different countries at the time. Like, when that was more in my childhood, to Turkey, and then.
I guess at this time you're like 18 or something, right? As well, right?
Yeah,
you're quite young.
Yeah, I'm 18, so I never went out the country on my own, right? Like, besides for school trips, maybe, and suddenly I'm in China with these people that I've never met. I'm put into random hotel that I've never seen, that had like construction sites all around it too.
Okay.
And I didn't even understand what was going on. And I don't know, the event was just surreal, because we had the group drawing at the beginning, and I remember this pretty vividly. We drew Curse, right? And St. Vicious looks at the board. He's like, "Oh, that's a free win."
Of course, yeah, it's a St. Vicious Prime, exactly. Of course.
St. Vicious, he like loudly proclaims, "That's a free win," and we play them, we play them in the first game in a stadium in Hangzhou.
Yeah, there's another thing. If people don't know, the other unique thing about this event is every match is on stage, and there's fans. I mean, listen, it's not like as glamorous as I'm maybe making it sound. Like you're in sort of like it'd be like a basketball gym or something in like the city or whatever. It's not like the stadium's not mega, but it's unique at the time. Like every match is on stage. You have like the big fucking entrance music. It was a big production, right?
Yeah, it was so surprising because we had this. The stage was built up. It was put on wooden stilts basically. So you had like the stage with booths actually next to one another, and we played on it, and like there were literally like, I don't know, 500, 600 Chinese people who had they didn't know who I was. They didn't know who any of my teammates were. Maybe they knew CitizenWayne at best, but likely they didn't know anyone besides the cursed gamers. And you have them screaming at every kill. You have them screaming for everything that's happening on the map, independently of whether or not they knew the players. And like then I go 0-5 in my first game on stage, shaken to my core. But my team carries me after Saint does a bit of an in towards Nasher, and suddenly we win. I'm like, what the hell just happened? And it was, I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's a really fun memory because I played like absolute trash. I had my first game, was the worst game I've ever played in my entire life, probably, solo queue included. And our teammates just lift me up, and we have 500, 600 Chinese people cheering for us. So that event like was so well operated, despite the times, and compared to even events like nowadays. And we had fans that we didn't even know were our fans, and we had translators with us. We had at the hotel we had breakfast, we had our practice setups in a different venue, whatever it is, and that was my first esports experience. And we eventually made it to third place after beating one random Chinese team. I think it was LGD at the time. Yeah, it was LGD. And then we lose to IG and W pretty quickly. But third place, first event, beat Saint Vicious, one of my idols at the time. It can't beat that, to be fair, you know.
Was World Elite really good?
They were really good. We didn't. I mean, again, like my teammates probably knew a bit better than me, simply because they were more advanced in terms of like, obviously where they were in terms of understanding the game. But when I played against them, like level 3, level 4, the game was just over. It was just over. Like there's nothing we could do. I got counter ganked once, and the game just ends, and then they snowball off of it, and it's like a 25-1 game, and we get to third place, not playing any of these teams. So I was kind of glad that happened.
I saw as well that actually, look, it was only briefly, but you also got to play a game against the classic CLG.EU lineup where you played them at a Dreamhack. So do you remember this? This was obviously the actual prime era when they were like the super late game team. All the famous memes everyone remembers. Like, do you remember playing against this team?
Yeah, I do. And before the game, like it was like Quickshot also was starting to cast at the time, I remember. And we kind of had this. There was kind of this meme going around about me and my play. Like people already knew from solo queue, but they knew that I was like really limited in my champion pool, right? So CLG.EU just banned Lee Sin and Xin Zhao, and I had to play like a.
They were the original ones to pull that move out. I see. Okay, right.
They were the OGs, and they put it out, and I was put on a third tier jungler, whatever it is, that I didn't really know how to play, and they completely destroyed us. So yeah.
All right, well, you do remember that game, then I'd say fair enough. Okay,
that was a pretty good experience, yeah. And I don't know, like, yeah, that was also the event where Bjergsen, was it Bjergsen? Yeah, it was Bjergsen. Copenhagen Wolves actually got onto the scene, and they kind of like showcased their skill set.
Yes,
and Fnatic ended up winning that whole tournament. But I don't know, that was my first time actually interacting with players in Europe on that level. Because obviously I couldn't interact with the Thai on IG when we're in China, right? I didn't know how to interact with PYL when he was on LGD. Like we had no connection with these players, right? But within EU, there were obviously these personal connections you had with the players, like M5, CLG.EU, Fnatic. They were all at the top. They all just made like, partially made words besides Fnatic. Fnatic just became really mad not making words, and you kind of had this fanboyism for them. And there were one or two players that were really just pretty good at like kind of like interacting with new players, and it was like Crepo and Snoopy were really open at that event. Like especially Crepo, I remember that very vividly, where he just talked to me as if I was a regular person. For me, like that was at the time he was like kind of up there, you know, like
sure.
I looked up to him, And yeah, and it was a very, very good event. But they were the OGs in terms of banning me out. Yeah.
I saw as well after you also went to that NorthCon, which was that land that literally is in the north of Germany, famously in the middle of fucking nowhere, by the way. But that's what Esports like. And you actually got to play, like you said, against the Copenhagen Wolves that had Svenskeren and Bjergsen. So people don't know. It's not like it's only later that you went to LCS and you knew Bjergsen and these players before then, right? But they were all up and comers like you at the time, right?
Yeah. And yeah, that was that event. I mean, as you said, in the middle of nowhere. Like I don't even know what the city was called.
It's called like Neumeister or something meant like Neumonster apparently. So I'd never heard of it myself, mate.
They had these technical difficulties and we had to play until 1 to 2 a.m.
Oh right, okay.
That was a good one. But yeah, that was kind of like that was the first time I met Bjergsen. That was the first time I met Svenskeren. Like we ended up losing. I mean, not really had that much practice, but whatever. It'd be how it be, but. Is you do go way back. Like if you really think about it, but in my head at least, I don't associate that with the Bjergsen I met later. I don't know how to.
No, this is one thing I want to ask, mate, which is this, because I had the same experience. So you have to understand, I interviewed Bjergsen in his first ever split in EULCS, right? And the joke is, in America, somehow when he even arrived, he already started to like level up and he became a lot more personable. And obviously years later, people know now he's a complete polished product, you know, like he's a guy who can do interviews, has his own. But at the time, the guy I met, mate, was just like a scared little kid for real, who's just like a super nerd. It was like, who's this guy? Oh, it's Bjergsen. In fact, the vibe, even when I met him, by the way, I couldn't even get the interview the first few weeks because the first few times I asked, people were like, oh, you don't ask him. Like, yeah, he doesn't do interviews and that. Like, and he was just some weird nerd kid there. I was like, it like you said, it's night and day from who he is now, right?
Yeah, and it was night and day from when I was on TSM too, because he became so much more confident and so much more outgoing. But even then, he tried to be outgoing. I think he tried, and
right.
It just, I mean, I wasn't necessarily the most social guy either. I was a nerd kid. The rest of the team was nerds like Defishi or whatever it is, and you got bro. I think the only one that was really outgoing was, as I said, CitizenWayne, and the rest of the team was just like whatever. But yeah, it was. It's so weird to think about like the events that you go to and then meeting these players along the lines like a couple of years later, because most of us changed so rapidly within a 1 or 2 year period in terms of our personalities, in terms of our ability to be outgoing, that the Bjergsen or even the Svenskeren of that point, like unrecognizable a couple of years later. It's just completely different thing.
Even though obviously like at this point in time you had a bunch of teams you bounced around in and played online cops. How did you end up in the Copenhagen Wolves lineup that people might know you from at this point in time with Jungler and Forgiven and all this? How did this lineup get composed?
So when I was playing in the Challenger circuit, I did face Copenhagen Wolves like with the Reckless plus Shook iteration,
right,
a bit in terms of scrims, and I knew Shook from solo queue. And when it came down to Shook was going to Alliance. It was pretty obvious at the time. Like everyone knew, Copenhagen Wolves knew, so he was going to leave. And they asked him what kind of replacement he thinks would be good for them, and then he recommended me, which I'm obviously grateful for because it kind of obviously started my career. Despite like I could have joined the LCS at the time in season 3 with Dragonborns, but I chose not to. Like they gave me an offer, but I mean, once I saw the Dragon Hands, I knew it's not going to be my thing. But and then I had the luck of and the fortune of like being in the channel circuit and then having Shook recommend me to the team. So he kind of did me a great favor. And when I try out for them, and when I try out with Forgiven too, like it was kind of a pretty good match. Like we felt like that we were gonna be able to compete quite a bit.
Right. Obviously, at this point in time, we have to bring up with the classic narrative, which is an old school narrative with you, which is even though later in your latter years, especially in LCS and LEC, etc., people are going to think like, I was just like a guy who only had like shot calling in his brain. Like you were actually a fucking hands player at this time. People don't. You unironically were the leasing mechanical player who would do all the like the sad thing. I always think in esports, right? One of the sad things I think why people don't respect history as much is because the games advance so rapidly and people put so many hours in. It's like the time span for things to not look impressive is way less than real sports. Like in real sports, it's true. If you go back and watch like a really old school one, like Pele or something, it won't look that impressive, unfortunately, because it'll look like, wow, like these defenders don't look very good or whatever. But that's because that's like 60 years ago now. The problem in esports is like even 5 or 10 years can have that same effect. So if I pull up the highlights now, right, mate, they're going to think like, this is just fucking normal. But like at the time, like doing insect kicks and stuff, this was like next level shit. Like if you could pull this off, I mean, even though you're saying like it's true, you maybe had like a limited like vision of the game and only a few champions you were good on. But the point was you were fucking really good on those champions. And if you were someone who could do like an insect kick back in the day, which wasn't that many top players could pull it off in pro play, you could change the whole game with that. Like people know that kicks are fucking one of the most OP moves in the game back then.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, like I was playing 2 to 3 champions mainly. I mean, I was expanding my champion pool, obviously, 2, but like it was basically centered around Lee Sin, Elise. Then there was a bit of Evelyn and Xin Zhao. But yeah, at the time, like there was kind of a mechanical revolution going on, right? Like we saw the insect for the first time. Like I mean, I saw it once done by Diamondprox back in season 2,
yes.
actually. But people didn't associate that with him because he war jumped first and then kick Q'd or something like that. So
he also wasn't like as insane like mechanics, so he would just do it like it would be like slower, but you could just see the moves all do it. Whereas part of what made the insect one insane is like it just looked like he bought and bashed it. It just happened or something, didn't it? It was so insane how fast it was.
Yeah, and like people didn't know that move at all. Like
yes,
when he saw that move, and was it also 2013? That like he made that move, and like people were mind blown because they didn't understand what was happening. Like I didn't know you could ward while Q hopping, or you couldn't ward while like to ward jump towards. So it became kind of like a race between certain players to figure out how can we make, and that's what I think. I mean, inside Kickstart is like how can we make a champion even more effective, right? So with Lee Sin, you suddenly had like multiple evolutions going on at the same time, right? You had the ward jump, which was the normal insect. Then when I was on Copenhagen Wolves, like I started doing the Q, and then to one person ward jump behind another person, kick him then, or even the kick flash, right? These things were not known at the time. No one did them, you know. So when Inside Kick started, it allowed someone like me who was trying to be creative at the time and maximize his champions, like to play off of that. And I don't like. I mean, I don't want to brag or whatever it is, but I was the first one to actually do the two things, like of kick flash on stage, and I was the first one to actually ward jump behind another person. Like no one did that at the time, right? So that's something I like. Like there was Svensson, me, and maybe Jankos were the only ones that were really, really trying to push that forward, and it was kind of like fun and Shook too. It was kind of fun to see that in scrims too, where people just try to outkick one another in some kind of way, and at some point, some people were able to really pull that off on stage, and I was one of the lucky few that had the mechanical ability at the time.
Right, people will know because actually my content was part of what really introduced this guy's ridiculous personality to the world, for good or for ill. I'll take it either way on that one. Obviously, I've known Forgiven for a long, long time, right? And he is deservedly a notorious figure in esports, and the mad thing about him is he's one of the only people I've ever met where, you know, normally when people are outrageous like him, you go, oh, that's just for the cameras, you know, like in real life it's not really like that. Like for example, like me, if you meet me, like I'm never going to really like flame everyone like I would on a show. The difference is Forgiven is like that, and maybe even worse. Like if anything, he actually sometimes comes off a bit more charming on camera, you know what I mean? Whereas like if people don't know, here's the problem I always think, unfortunately, cause like a bunch of like new community, because he got banned from solo queue for flaming people. People think that he was just like permatoxic to everyone, but they don't understand, like, it wasn't that he would be permatoxic to his own teammates, but he would fucking complain all the time. He was like a brutal teammate, I will say that. I've known a lot of the teammates he's had, and like, even the ones who like him, their take is sort of like this amazing. It's like, he's really good at the game. And then that's it. Like they never say like, and he was a cool guy. They're all sort of like, but he was good at the game, and you know he did want to win and that. Give me. You must have a story. Like I'm sure when you first meet this guy, when you first play the first game. Also, spoiler: Jungler's got it the worst on his teams as well. Like this was the guy where people know the stories. Like he wasn't even the guy like gank for me. He was like, why would you even gank there? You know what I mean? Like he sounded like such an unusual cat. So what was your experience like playing with this guy, meeting this guy?
I'm trying to figure out okay, so the first time we must have met was in Paris, I think, for Gaming Week, and I mean, but the stories that I truly remember were the ones when we're in the gaming house in Bad Honnef, when we finally had a gaming house, and it's that he was always at his PC. He never did anything else, and sometimes went back to his room to sleep. That was it. But no matter what, there was always something to complain about, right? Like something to complain about. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was, right? Like something had to be complained about. Like I guess the best story I could tell is like when we're in Copenhagen, we're at a boot camp. We're about to qualify for the SAS qualifier to meet MYM, and we're literally like 4-0 or 3-0 in the group, right? So we only had to win one more game, the 100% through, and we're gonna make it to the LAN event, which allowed us to qualify eventually. And he literally gets so mad at I get so mad at me not ganking bot lane level 3 that after the game he gets up. And that was like after a regular scrim. We only had to win one more game. Like, and we had scrims after the scrim, and he literally tries to fight me, right? Physically, he's like, "Why do you not fucking get bottom?" And you're like, "Why don't you do that? Why did you like? You're supposed to be here and here." You know, like I'm like, dude, I'm not gonna do that. I had different plans in that game. I told you before the game, whatever it is, and we had this discussion. And at some point, we just stand in front of one another, like kind of like. I mean, I'm like a 19-year-old kid. I was a bit bigger at the time. Like, I mean, kind of like now, I guess, compared to Forgiven, was always a bit scrawny. But like, standing in front of one another and pretending we're in a fight, right? And our owner had to step in, and it was just ridiculous to think about because we're arguing about a video game, and like none of us were actually wrong or right, but we had no mediator, right? So, like we're just we had to mediate ourselves. But I know Costas and I would always say that, and like the good player is not really that what I'm thinking about. But I think outside of the game, he's a good person. Like I do think that he has certain ambitions and certain like problems, whatever it is, that many people may not know about, and he might have to share for himself at some point. But it never seemed like that he was doing anything out of anything but his own.
It's kind of like a misguided drive to win, right? Like he really did want to win.
Not even that. Like I mean, he kind of had a bit of a self-destructive personality, like I would say, and he still has it. And I don't think it's necessarily about him just wanting to win, but I think he just really wanted to succeed, and but it also like to kind of stay true to himself and kind of stay true to his. It felt like more of a family thing, to be fair. Like that's at least my understanding.
Put it this way, I'll give you like a quick anecdote that'll explain that I think you're talking about. Like, I've asked him over the years, even like during like his prime years in the games, there would be times where the most famous example is like where he just wouldn't play like Sivir or Kalista, right? And at the time, his logic for why he wouldn't play fucking Sivir, even though it was easily one of the best ADCs, and by the way, all like Uzi and everyone used it back in China, right? His logic was like, because he thought it wasn't like a truly skilled champion, it can just push all the time. His logic was like, he actually told me straight up one time, and I remember thinking this is mental, but fair play. Is like you're saying, in a way, there's almost like he thought it was like an honor thing, dude, for real. Like his logic was, I would rather literally lose than play what I think is like a skillless champion and then win. Like in that scenario, it's like his logic was like, I'd rather use the harder champion. Then if I win, it's like I know I'm better than you, which sounds so weird, but I know what you mean. In a fucked up way, I sort of admire it. I know that sounds mad.
Yeah, no, like he carries himself with honor, and I think that's something I admire a lot about Costas, because he's very different to a lot of players where he never compromised to make money, right? He never did that. He never compromised his ethics. He never whatever fucked up ethics he had, or like whatever his personality type was, he never compromised the points he stood by, right? So he never was someone that would purposely write to people and be like, hey, I want to play with you. I want to play for you. Please let me get in the team. No, he just expected people to come to him, and he did what he had to do, which was in his mind his job, right? Do I agree with all of his methods? And to this day, very much no, because I do believe that and that's what I learned later in my career too, like especially more, there's a lot more to the game than just performing mechanically.
Yes.
But you have such a large impact on other players, right? Like, and he always forgot about the duty. I guess he forgot about the duty that he had towards his team in a way, or like towards keeping other people at a mentally stable level too, right? Because his methods were a bit harsh. He obviously flamed a bit, but everyone at the time was less sensitive now than they were now. So
Yes.
he obviously has to put into the time zone or the what was happening. But he was definitely over the top a lot of the times. And I would say if I was playing with Costas again right now for some reason whatsoever, the interactions would be a lot different. They would be a lot more mature. Like, he was a kid at the time, I was a kid at the time, and we just didn't understand how to interact. And he probably had a rough time adapting to, just the standard of living in a different country, living with different people. But you don't really think about these things when you're in the zone, I guess, or when you're fighting for your survival in the LEC, LCS, whatever it is. You just care about winning and staying in there and performing as well as possible. And quite frankly, like, at some point it worked for him, right? When he joined HGK and suddenly he had a good thing going for him, So.
By the way, the other reason why Forgiven got to have this like crazy like entrance to the LEC, well, it was EU LCS back at the time, and became this like iconic figure who was simultaneously like, Europe's problem child, but also like sometimes the best player, is because the hype wasn't over. I know fans and Americans always thought this, like, they always thought like he was overrated. It's like, bro, that's how I know you don't know what the scrims were like. Because, mate, some of the stories, the joke is he was like the stereotype in scrims. Like, he'd just have the lane perma-pushed. Like, he doesn't care if the other junglers come in, like, all that shit's real, like, that he wants to win 2v3. Like, he had such a crazy mindset for the game, but the point was, at the time, it's kind of like you with the jungle. In Season 4, if you really could do all this shit and be mechanically as proficient, you could be way better than even the other, like, EU LCS ADCs, right?
Yeah, he was far ahead of everyone. Like, in terms of the early game, like, his early game was unmatched. Every single early game he taught, like, he was the first one to kind of teach winning lanes. And I think that's what a lot of players didn't understand at the time. Like, there was no one playing Karma. Like, no one really understood the champion of Karma. So when he taught Peter Unlimited, like, the champion, and how to poke with it in lane, like, it suddenly worked out, and winning lanes became a thing. Before that, scaling was kind of the default. You had the Yellow Peats, you had the Recklesses, who were all playing a scaling type, and then you have this guy who breaks open the meta and is like, I'm gonna play Caitlyn, I'm gonna harass you on a turret, and I'm going to 30 CS up plus, and I'm gonna take a turret, And the stories are real, and the way that he operated the game from a mechanical standpoint, and like how proficient he was in terms of the early game, and I'm going to keep saying early game because mid and late game might have been something different, was completely unique and was unseen at the time. It's just the only player that came close to what I've seen in Forgiven was actually Lumi when I was on Acer. Lumi was very unique in the style too, and did whatever he wanted to do, and did it mechanically on a level that, like, a lot of players couldn't match, right? But Forgiven really put it to test in the early game, and he was able to succeed against everyone. Even when WE came over for it was
like an IEM or something, yes.
Yeah, we scrimmed them quite a bit, and we actually had a pretty good win rate against them. And every single game, like,
oh yeah, by the way, don't worry. This is how ridiculous Forgiven is. He was even messaging me after, like you're saying, just scrims, not even like an official match. And he was like, I just beat Wei Zhao in lane. It's like, oh, so ridiculous, a human being. I know.
Yeah. Like, he was celebrating himself, and I can see that. And but when it came to the issue that he had is this proficiency that came into play in the early game. He kind of overdid in the mid to late game, right? So we had, and this, like, I to this day I cherish what he said. It was like, hey, Forgiven, why are you always out of mana when we're trying to fight? And he's like, I'm not out of mana. I have one spell rotation. I don't need more. I'm like, what do you do if the team fight goes like beyond that? Yeah, then it's lost anyway. So that was it,
Go. Exactly.
So that's it.
Yes.
And that's a whole discussion. And he had such a unique way to formulate things and how to see the game. And it's like, his early game was unmatched, and a lot of the players in EU had to get to his level. Like, Niels had to get to his level, like when he played solo queue. But Reckless especially, I think, talked highly of Forgiven for quite a bit, because he was the grandfather of early game AD carries in EU. Like, and there's no doubt about it, right?
Yes. By the way, along these lines, right, another thing, I did hear this from Forgiven, which I want to set it up like this. So if it's wrong, let me know. But I suspect there's some truth to it. One of the things back in the day, because another thing people don't know that is kind of crazy about Forgiven, is people don't know he was kicked from every team. That's not a joke. As in, even this one, you're all thinking, no way, like Copenhagen Wolves wasn't even that good a team. They were barely a playoff team. Like, he obviously left and went to SK. No, the reason he had to split off is like every team kicked him eventually because of these issues. Like, it didn't matter how good you were in the game. Eventually, it's like you said, I think you phrased it excellently earlier. I also suspected something similar, that there was a self-destructive element, because it wasn't just that he complained because people fucked up things in the game. As you say, there would always be something, and there would always be some problem with almost every teammate, except the ones who just blindly did everything he said, basically. That was actually, by the way, also what kind of like was a bit of a downside, is like, he would be super brutal on people, but if you were the person who just did everything he always said and took it, then he would actually give you like a little bit of a break. He'd be like easy on it, like he did that to some of his supports if they just did whatever he wanted. But the problem is, right, when he got kicked out of this team, he told me the other way around. He was like, well, like, I wouldn't want to be in that team anyway, because people like Youngborg, I think Coutard were the two he was naming. He was like, these guys, literally, if you go look on solo queue, then they're not even trying. They're in like, I think he said they were in like Masters or something ridiculous like that, you know, back then. Is it true that some people in the team weren't as diligent? Because I know the problem there is it's easy for him to look like the bad guy if he is putting mad hours in, and it's easy for the guy who's putting not as much of the hours in to sort of be like, whoa, calm down, dude. Whoa, was there any of that in the team? What was Copenhagen Wolves' environment like?
I actually talked to Youngberg about this a couple of days ago. Like, I talked to him about, like, just, we reminisced a bit, right? The way that I guess we're doing right now. And he told me that in retrospect, he was really burned out during that split, because for him, it was, he kind of capped at I get to LCS, right? That was his cap. I'm just going to get to LCS and that's it for me.
That was
right?
the accomplishment for him, right?
That was the accomplishment for him. So there was a sense of, yes, people weren't as diligent and weren't as hardworking as Forgiven was, because they saw the scale of accomplishment a lot differently. And Coutard eventually like after the split, I think even stopped playing, and he went to study and now has a family too. And Youngberg, I mean, he went on for another year, but I think that the thing about Copenhagen Wolves is that most people don't understand, we're smurfing in the challenger scene, and this might be whatever, Civis or Scrim versus competitive, right? But we had an issue at the beginning of the year, and that was like due to ownership and due to misguidance. We continuously had to move from hotel to hotel in Cologne, right? So we're moved to Cologne, and we're told we're gonna have a gaming house really soon. That was a false promise. We moved from gaming from apartment to apartment, from hotel to hotel, and literally had to like leave hotels at like 12, go to practice with our suitcases in the right offices, which were like 30, 40 minutes away. Then we had to, like in the middle of the night, drive home from those right offices, oftentimes like taking even longer, because then the trains or trams weren't running that quickly anymore. And then had to go to the next apartment or hotel, right, and check in. So like our schedule was all sorts of fucked. So even in the case that like people were burned out because of their goal setting orders, the only ones that were not fucked by what was happening were literally me and Coutard, because I stayed home. I was like, okay, if that's happening, I'm just gonna go home and come to Cologne for the SCS days, because I'm literally like an hour and a half away. So why would I do that to myself, right? And then Coutard just went home and flew to Cologne every couple of weeks, right? But the other three, and I can't blame them for that. Like, we're literally just, I mean, including Forgiven, were probably really destroyed by the schedule that they had to put up with, right? So I can't blame what was happening, like, to their necessarily like degree of wanting it more, wanting it as much as other people, right? But yeah, like there was a difference in goal setting, but also there are so many circumstances that led to people just underperforming and being burned out that I can't even blame them in retrospect.
Right. In this time period, at the end, you guys did make the playoffs, but you had this brutal thing where first you had to play like Alliance, who obviously ended up being really good eventually and had already sort of started to come online. But I remember this was a series off the top of my head where I think you even had like early game leads in this series. And then afterwards, obviously you played Gambit and Diamondprox in like the placement match and then lost that one brutally as well. Like, these are winnable series, actually, even though on paper people are going to look back and go, oh, I'm sure the big favourite was going to win. Like, Copenhagen Wolves could have won. By the way, that's the part also about Forgiven that I used to, in a weird way, admire, as much as he was definitely a bit crazy, which is normally, right, like you said about the Young Buck example, most players actually aren't the guys like, I'll do everything to win and like everything's just about winning. Most people have like a level of gradation. It's like, right, well, I'm like this good and it'd be good to go like a couple of levels higher. So for most players, I'd imagine Copenhagen Wolves, like making playoffs is a good thing. Maybe we could win a series. Like Forgiven actually did, I'm not joking, believe he could win every game in every series with every team he played on, even though that is totally wrong and that is not the way esports works. Like I know, like in this, like did the team actually think you could win these games? Was it plausible?
We finally had a gaming house at the end of the split, and we're finally getting together as a team, right? Me and Forgiven kind of aligned more in our values, and like the rest of the team kind of followed suit, I guess. So once we were on the same page, it felt pretty good, and we won game 1 against Alliance. Game 2, we're up 5k, we lose that one. Game 3, we get a level 1 kill, and we lose despite that because we just get outscaled. Like that series, I mean, I think we're all convinced that we're going to win. Like we had the number. We didn't have the number in the regular season. We went 1-3, but we had the game 1 of the year was basically against them. We beat them pretty cleanly, and we kind of knew how to play against them. So we had this lane swap thing going. We had our prep going. We knew what they're going to play, and we felt very, 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 very confident. It just happened to be that we choked under pressure. Quite frankly, we didn't have the experience in mid to late game, which kind of speaks to what I said earlier, right? That we kind of had a misalignment in terms of what we want to do, and we didn't know how to finish games. Like throughout the split, we always had games that dragged on for way too long for no reason whatsoever, and then we literally like did a 15-minute win, right? So the
if people don't know, by the way, this is actually a detail I should probably mention for context. Because this is spring of 2014, this was the period when, especially like the mid laner of your team, Kautar, people would play stuff like Ziggs and you could just extend the game forever, right?
Yeah, and there was a lot of Ziggs going on. There was decent amount of Yasuo as a counter pick, which is also what we played. But in general, like people played a lot of scaling, right? They played a lot of control mages. So you could kind of extend the game for quite a bit of time. And when we played the Lions, we knew that they were going to do something like that. We're going to play Karthus. They were going to play like weird champions that Frog is known for. But we thought we could end them by the time that was going to be a thing, right? And we just weren't able to close them out because our macro understanding was on such a low level that like we didn't know how to take tier 2s, we didn't know how to set up for tier 3s, and that was our issue, right? We never got past the early game, I guess, dominance, and we didn't know how to snowball that out of control, which, I don't know, like, to this day, I guess it is what it is. Might have actually made people like Young Buck actually try to figure that one out later on in their careers, like a lot more, right? Like how to take tier 2s, how to make strategies for that. Because we could, for the life of us, understand any of that. We had everything prepped. From level 1 to level whatever it is, like when we take first turret, second turret, first dragon, second dragon, but beyond that, no chance. We didn't have it in our game, and then we kind of already destroyed, and then we play against Gambit in the when we had the 5th and 6th place match to showcase who was going to go to relegations, and same concept, basically win game 1, not that clean. Game 2 should have been won, lose that one again, and then game 3, same level 1 kill, and we lose that one again. So for us, afterwards, I was just laying on the floor. I didn't know what to do because I thought it was going to be, I was shaking my hands, whatever it is. Like, I had this insane fear of like, oh, is this going to be really it? Is that already it? Like half a year?
Like that could be the end of your career, you thought?
Yeah, I mean, I was not convinced that I had I didn't really do a lot of networking, right? For me, it was never a thing. I still don't do it. I just don't. I should, but I don't care as much about connecting with people in that regard because I'd rather let my whatever it is do the talking, you know. But even at the time, like I thought, man, this is gonna be. I called my parents like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning, and it was like after we came back with a shuttle, and I told them, yeah, I don't know, I'm really fucking afraid. Like this is gonna be it. And they asked me, hey, do you want to come home? I'm like, nah, I think I gotta stick this one through. And we eventually played the relegations against Kikis and Woolite.
It was all Polish team, if people remember, yeah.
Yeah, and we beat them. So, and then we stuck it through. And I thought I'm going to stay on this team, and we're going to try again in summer. And I don't know, like, Forgiven didn't have the same feeling. He knew he was gone, but he also knew he was going to leave, right? So Forgiven's story ended by the time relegations came around because he was just done with the team. Like, you'd feel it. He played Grace when no one was playing Grace, and he was not playing to his usual self. We still won the series, but the man looked broken. He felt broken. He was done with the split, right? And the other ones were I mean,
it's like you say, most of them didn't have much of a career playing bars afterwards. Well, obviously, then the crazy thing here is the contrast must be mental because, like you say, you literally at the moment. By the way, anytime your parents are like, "You can come home," that's sort of like life's way of just being like, if you're totally broken, just come back to like the nest and then like rebuild yourself. That's like that shows like the depth. So to go from that to like just join TSM, if people don't know at the time. I'll just be real. Like TSM was probably the biggest gaming team in the world. Like because you had the enormous stream success. Like the scale of it was enormous. So how does an offer come from TSM out of this?
I don't fucking know. I mean, it's like, I mean, I guess another anecdote is like I woke up at like 9 a.m. over this, and I get a call from my owner, from the CW owner. And I was like, I'd like you to meet someone. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, I just hop in the call, and he hops in the call, and like suddenly Reginald is on the other end, like so. And I knew Reginald at the time, right? Obviously, and he's like, yeah, well, I've been watching your games and I've been reviewing games, and I would want you to join TSM. I'm like, and then my owner's like, would you want to do that? I'm like, I didn't even ask my parents. I didn't ask anyone. I just said, yeah, I'm going to do it. Sure, I'm going to do it. That very morning, within like a 1 hour period, I was sold off to TSM, to the United States, and that was basically it.
Was there no hesitancy about having to move to America?
No, because it was TSM.
Okay.
Because it was TSM, I didn't think about it. Like it was, and quite frankly, the way that Reggie handled it was kind of cool. Like calling someone at like for him in the middle of the night, like me early in the morning, and just being like, "Hey, do you want to join our team?"
Did it make you feel important?
It made me feel pretty fucking important. It made me feel like I'm wanted. They really wanted me.
So you've been headhunted by a company, innit? It's like that vibe of like they want me specifically.
Yeah, and then he asked me to talk to the team, and he asked me to join the TeamSpeak, and it's like I joined the TeamSpeak. Bjergsen was on there, Darius was on there, and we talked for a bit. And it's like, how do you want us to call you? And I'm like, I said Maurice, like, and Bjergsen was like, Morris, okay, like so Morris, and then I came like in the end, like for half a year I was called Morris, like even though my name is Maurice. So anyway, that was like kind of what it is, and yeah, there was no hesitancy on my end, and I just when the offer came through, and I told my friends, I was like, TSM just fucking called, like I'm gonna join them. My little brother obviously knew who they were. My parents didn't really have that much knowledge, but I told them I'm going to move to the United States, and that was it. Yeah, that was basically just it. It was that simple. It was really that simple.
One of the things I always wondered about with this move is, like, on paper, it makes perfect sense. I mean, the joke is, even with the Reggie story you've got there, exactly sounds like what would happen. Because if people don't know, in the split that had just happened, but in LCS instead of in EU LCS where you were, in LCS, this was the split where Cloud9 had beaten TSM again, but even when they had Bjergsen. So at the time, what everyone said, everyone on all the shows, some insight, it was the community's general sentiment was, the obvious upgrade is upgrade the odd one for a mechanical jungler, because that was the one area that he was a bit deficient in. But this is and so obviously the joke is, even if it was like a movie, like the movie where like the rich head of the company's like, who's this guy? Bring me someone like that. So if someone was like, bring me a guy with mechanics, like that's obviously your main strength. Like that part makes perfect sense. But what I wanted to ask you was this. I often thought, because to be fair, we didn't know as much about the game back then. Back then, he used to just recruit the best players he could. People didn't understand how to build teams, how to balance like strengths. People didn't think about things like shot calling and who's a veteran and who's not. Because it was so early in the game, as the first couple of years of League of Legends, he just put the best teams he could together. So the question I would have though is, I actually, when I look back now, wonder if that was like actually a bit of a harsh transition, because what people didn't account for was the odd one had been in TSM forever. He was like the soul of the team, and his whole strength was he was a cerebral player, and he played original for years. So, like, I actually imagine when they brought you in, I mean, who knew how that was going to fit together, right? Like, did you have a sense how they wanted you to play, or what you were going to do, or if you had to be a leader, or if you had to be who was the leader? Did you have any sense of this when you joined?
They asked me. I mean, they asked me if I was doing a bit of shot calling on CW, and I obviously was, but I didn't know what shot calling meant at the time, right? I knew what I did on my team, which is like call for ganks, make a bit of mid game calls, late game calls. That was it. But it wasn't like structured. It was more like in the moment, right? So when I came to TSM, the transition was, as you said, pretty harsh. It suddenly had to be structured. Everything had to be structured. Like everything I did had to be structured, right? So from my early game plans to the mid game shot calling, whatever it is. And I couldn't do it. I literally couldn't do it. I was not good enough at the time yet. I did not understand it. And my playstyle was very selfish because I came from a team that needed firepower on my end, right? Like I needed, like CW, if I wasn't trying to carry, like the only one that could was maybe Forgiven, but the rest of the team wasn't really capable of doing that, right? So, or they didn't have the playstyle for it. So I had to kind of overcompensate and overfarm a lot of the times. And when I came to TSM, well, that's what I did too, right? I did just replicate the same playstyle. And I thought that was going to work. We had a good couple of games in the beginning. It didn't, I mean, we're still kind of shaky. But when we really met the people that were good at the game, right? Like LMQ, CLG was still pretty good at the time, like, and then we've met C9 and Dignitas, right? Like these teams were way ahead of us. They were just way better. Because every jungler was able to do plays early game. I just didn't know how to with my team because I didn't communicate with them yet. They didn't really understand how I was communicating. I mean, not even language barrier, but we also had like a complete issue with shot calling, right? And it's not necessarily only the odd one leaving that shot calling hole, right? It was also Expecial leaving the team, right?
Yes.
Expecial being exchanged for Glebe. And the two at the time, like me and Glebe, were supposed to be those mechanical prodigies that were going to carry or help carry the team.
Yes.
But whatever we did, it just didn't work because none of us could shot call, right? So our game was so unstructured and we always waited for a mistake. We're kind of, if by EU terms we'd find a comparison, NIP. Basically, NIP was like kind of the same way we played, right? Strong laning phase because we had good laners everywhere. We had farming jungler, and then at some point we found a mid-game team fight, and then we either won or lost, right? And that's not how Reggie wanted to play the game. That's not how Reggie saw the game, and that's not how Loco saw the game either, because he obviously came from Korea where it was a lot more structured. And it took a long time for me to even get close to the ability necessary to shot call consistently. And even then I needed Bjergsen to do that with me and for me too, right? So me and Bjergsen were basically interchangeably shot calling and we did it together. And at some point we made it work, but I gotta say, like working 12 to 14 hour days for basically 4 to 5 months to make that happen. It took a bit, it took a lot out of me, but it felt like it was worth it in the end. And Reggie and Loco were always on top of what they were doing with us. So they made sure that we had everything we needed, but they also made sure that we were pushed to the uttermost, right? They really believed we had to win the split. That was their belief system. We had to win the split. Like there was no other way. We had to win the split. We bring people over. We had to win the split.
Right, here's the thing. Even though this is your reflection, so in theory, I could just hit all the high points. Right, I know you're a good sport, so you'll oblige me in this case, right? Just for the sake of just for the sake of the people who are old school and don't know the story. There's obviously a hilarious anecdote about one of the matches you played in the LCS when you joined TSM, which basically, I'll give the basics, but you fill in the details. As far as I remember, the gist was right before you played this match, you did an AMA, and in the AMA, you were like, "These are the 3 champions I'm really good at," and they not only like banned the champions, but they also like picked another one or something, and basically like you ended up on some like what was like fiddlesticks or something ridiculous, right? Give me the story. What was the story of how this went down? Basically, it was one of those ones where like now in the modern day you'd do like a meme video and it'd be like the fucking Curb Your Enthusiasm theme plays right after you do the AMA, because obviously it's like you sort of set yourself up in a way, right?
Yeah, I decided to give them an AMA, and they asked me what kind of champions I could perform at, because I only had high win rates at like Lee Sin and Eve, but I was known for my Lee Sin and Elise, so I was like, I can play Kha'Zix and Eve and Elise at the same level that I can play Lee Sin, no problem, First game it was against C9, I think that was the first game.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, first game, I see Lee Sin Ben, I see, what did I see? I saw Eve Ben, I saw Kazakhstan, I think, and then like.
And this is when there's only 3 bands, guys. This isn't the modern day. There's only 3 bands in the game at a time.
Yeah, and then I see the fourth champion being first picked. I'm like, all right.
This has to be like, is this a fucking joke? Like, what's going on here?
I was like, I guess you guys have to carry. By the way, you guys have to carry. So I just picked Xin Zhao. I got a first blood, but we auto lost the game because we went bot side at like 20 minutes and. Yeah, we just lost Nasher, and I was like, okay, well, that happened. And I was like, there's no way that's going to happen again. We play against Dignitas, same thing happens, and I play volleyball into the Pokemon. I'm like, okay. This can't be. This is...
that's like some like welcome to the LCS shit, isn't it? Like, they're just fucking with you at that point.
Yeah, they were... They literally took me to the cleaners right there, and I thought, man, this is kind of intense. That's kind of bad.
Sure.
And then I hear then I see the tweets, then I hear there's something inside thing going on, and I was like, damn, am I really this bad? Like, and yeah, it no, but the mystery is that no one at the time played any but these 4 champions were the meta.
Yes.
So everyone played those, and people then like when they saw that happening to me, they were like, man, maybe we should play Nocturne,
right?
Maybe play Jarvan.
Right.
So like I got taken to the cleaners, but everyone else was doing the same thing, but they were less proficient at the champions than I was. Like, I mean, my Lee Sin and Lees were like almost undefeated throughout the split, right?
Yes.
My even Kha'Zix less so, but yeah, it was a welcome to the SCS kind of moment, and I don't know, I felt pretty bad about it, but in the end, it's a pretty fun thing to have happen in your first 2 out of 3 games or something like that.
Sure,
it was a good one.
Thing is, though, even though obviously that makes it sound silly, and as you say, everyone was flaming you at the time, I have a question along these lines, though, which is one thing I've noticed, and I've talked to a lot of the European players who went to NA in this regard. Right, look, in your case, because you went to TSM, like, look, when you're on TSM, you're going to have TSM fans that support you. It's true, you're going to have that fan base. But I've always had this vibe, amazing, that, like, even though importing is what has brought LCS its success in its best ever teams, I get the vibe like there are actually a lot of American fans who sort of like low-key hate on Europeans who go over there and sort of like, in English you'd say like prey on their downfall. They're sort of waiting for you to fail so they can be like, haha, look, he's not that good, or he's overrated or whatever. I got the vibe that was part of why people were being so brutal with you in this, because that's just a funny week of LCS in reality. Like the rest of the split, you were having awesome games, you were carrying loads of games, you had a whole bunch of like games where you had Lee Sin and Kha'Zix and just dominated. But like, what do you think on that? Did you have a similar sense that there's a bit like maybe they're a little bit like anti-European or something?
There was some vitriol going on. Like I remember it, like, and I never encountered that even like at the events I played till then, right? And I was like one fan like just literally just talking to my face and like, you're fucking bad or something like that. And I literally confronted him in the studio. I was like, what? Like what? I don't know if I told him to shut the F up or something like that, but I confronted him in the studio. It's like that was the first time that had happened. That vitriol kind of come my way. And when I looked at the online comments, and I was like, these are not the people that I know from CW, because I had a small fan base, but I had like 4,000 people on Facebook, something like that, and all of them were very positive, right? So who are these people that are suddenly so openly hostile towards me? And it took a bit for me to understand that, like, it was TSM fans, it was mostly North Americans, but I don't think they did it because they hated Europeans. I think they literally just hated. I mean, I just didn't have a personality. I didn't have a personality, and I was replacing one of the most charismatic people in the scene, right? In Odd One, who like had a quite the following, right?
For sure,
and I was also playing for TSM, and then we were also underperforming. Like there was so many things going on. It's like, I think some of it might be that because I'm a European, but I think it was mostly because I was literally just not a very personal person. That was it. Like I think I became way more outgoing later in my career, but in the early part of my career, the only thing I knew how to do was like interact with my teammates. But social media was basically me just being a brat, and that was it, if anything. So people thought I was probably a brat. People thought I was a bit dickish, and I didn't really give them any incentive to think any other way. And I didn't have the same transition period that Bjergsen had, because when Bjergsen came, he had the whole off-season to prepare, right? The whole off-season, he streamed, right? He made fans, whatever it is. And I was able to stream for like a week until it was like basic couple of days that I streamed, and I did that, and I couldn't really build up the same way that Bjergsen was able to. And then we had to scrim, and then we moved to 3 blocks, even 3.5 blocks to a certain extent, and we had like 10-hour days. So afterwards I was just cooked. So I didn't really establish a fan base the same way that other people were able to.
Right, I've got a very specific way of asking you about your coach, Locodoco, because I'm going to have to first set up some context for people, which is at the time, there barely were any coaches. That's why actually Monty coaching CLG even remotely was such a big deal, because there weren't real coaches. I mean, even when people would list someone, often it would just be like a manager or like someone who used to be a pro who's a friend of the team or something, you know. Like at this time, Loco joining TSM was also a massive like blockbuster move. Like here's someone coming from Korea to join a Western team. If people don't know, it's a real story. He had the choice to to join Alliance or TSM, and he was briefly coaching Alliance first in Europe. So, like, he was actually a headhunted guy. People wanted this guy. And I know people now, this is the problem. You have to sort of explain Locodoco to explain this. But basically, even though people sort of now act like he was a joke, like a Mickey Mouse coach, he wasn't a real one. I always say this, even the way they diss him, actually low-key, shows they don't know the era amazing. Because you know when people say, all he did is just take things he heard from the Korean players and do it in the LCS, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? That's an insane advantage to have. A guy who can talk to all the Korean pros and actually bring what they're doing in the meta. That's not even a bad thing at the time. That would be OP as fuck. And then the other thing I'd also say as well is the problem Loco has, this is why he came off so badly in the Breaking Point documentary, why everyone thinks he wasn't a real coach. His problem was he did have good game knowledge and he had like an interesting mind for the game. It's just that personality-wise, I've always said this, the reason I get along with Loco is because to me he's like my little brother, but the problem is like little brother vibe isn't the vibe for the coach, you know. So his main problem in general, as far as I can tell from talking to a lot of his teammates and players who played for him, is he just had a hard time like establishing himself as like the proper Korean coach, like the head coach figure, like the father figure. He was more like, you know, your fucking kid brother or something, which does make it weird if he's your coach. So give me some thoughts on working with Locodoco, because I feel like, look, I'm not going to say he was like the greatest coach ever, but I do think he's like maligned. Like people act like he did nothing. Like he was, at the time, he was doing something, right?
He was, I mean, in the beginning of the split, he was very, very helpful. Like whatever, like he was the sole coach in the beginning of the split too, right? Like when he came over, I think it was like week 3 or week 2 or week 3. He didn't even come over in the beginning. He came over week 3. So before that, we were entirely clueless. So within a short time period, he had to work with like obviously an import jungler who didn't really understand like the game at the highest level yet. Had a new support who really didn't understand anything. No offense to Gleep, but you know,
and had a lot of real life problems, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, and then he had to kind of manage that entire thing. And what he did was like he was actually able to entertain certain concepts that were pretty foreign to us at the time, right? Like the mainly around rotations, like from obviously mid to bottom order rotations, but mainly out of the individual things that were kind of like picked up by Koreans that were not really picked up in the West. How to maximize your flashes, like how to make sure that you can punish flash timers correctly. Like certain things that were obviously obvious at this point in time were not obvious quite then. And he had a lot of, I guess, like his own demons to battle with in the end, because like obviously people think about him as a kind of this party guy, whatever it is.
Yep.
But he didn't really have that acting out at all when I was there. I think until like I was basically at home for a week between playoffs and the split to do something with my visa, whatever it is, right? And yeah, he had a lot. He had a really weird, difficult team to work with, but he did a good job until the very end of the year, when it became kind of obvious that, as you said, like this dynamic between us and him was not quite working, and we was not able to establish authority every single time. And when he was saying things, they were not quite as researched as they were in the beginning of the split, right? So he did fall off a bit, but it wasn't like like in some kind of malicious party way or something like that. It was literally just, I mean, maybe just didn't really understand the workload that he had to get into, whatever it is, and I can't blame him for that. And Reggie also took quite over when he saw the team was not performing to his standards, which was getting to become the best team in North America and potentially one of the best teams in the world. Like Reggie just pushed him slightly out of position, I would say, and replaced him as the de facto head coach. And that must have been pretty difficult for him too at some point in time, because then obviously he was like not just, I guess, like the dynamic was already like kind of scuffed, but then at some point the dynamic was obviously established completely differently than it was intended to be. So I don't know, like he was able, like within seconds, because if I asked, hey, what does Dandy run on Jarvan, you know, I had it within seconds, right? What did they play in Korea? Well, they play that. What did they do with Lisa and Lisa out in Kazakhstan and Eva out? What did they do? Well, they just play that, and they think that's good. And he wasn't just connected in Korea, but he was also connected in Europe, where he was able to talk to Alliance members and was able to kind of connect us with them. And we kind of always had this flow of information no one had in the scene. And yes, it was a big fucking difference compared to all the other teams, because none of the teams understood the meta game, especially towards playoffs and towards Worlds, as early as we did. We just understood it better because of our green information. So that's what it is.
By the way, obviously, when you've come on talk shows, including obviously originally it was Summoning Insight, we've discussed in the past, because it's obviously the funny angle that people wouldn't expect about us being on the same content, is back then, in theory, Thorin, Monty / Summoning Insight is like versus TSM, Reginald, Loco. Yeah. And part of the reason why, if people don't know, is because it's basically like the perfect shitstorm. Like, first of all, TSM fans anyway, even before we'd ever said anything, they are just that fan base that has like a bit of like sort of a fucking like insecurity, like they always think people hate on them. They always think everyone wants them to lose. They always think everyone hates TSM. That's just always the way those fan base is anyway. But then on top of that, Reginald and Monty obviously had their own rivalry over the years. And then Loco used to be friends with Monty, if people don't know. And they had a falling out when he joined TSM, partly over like whether Loco should be a coach or not, which is like, whatever, it's by the by. But you can see how all these things swirling together were causing like friction. And basically, but even, I think it was even before you'd arrived, we'd had like the initial beefs, etc. But what people don't know is, I've heard from some of the players inside, so I wanted to get your take on it. This is the way I want to ask about it was, I get the sense that it wasn't just that like we were, and obviously spoiler, when that game happened where you got donked on with all the fucking draft, of course that was like the ultimate fucking comedic fodder for so many insight. We would go wild on it. Of course it was hilarious. But at the time, to me, you have to understand, from our side, we thought it was you guys pushing all that beef. We were like, we're not even hating on that much. Like, look, it's true, we didn't roast other people as much, but then also other people aren't TSM. It's not as easy to roast, right? It's not as obviously like fucking lampoonable. So I would ask is this. I also got the vibe that it wasn't just like people didn't like us dissing them or so. There was Reginald also, the way he kind of led the team, as far as I know, is he did want to sort of engender like it's us versus the world, like everyone's against TSM, like, you know, the reason we have to be together is because like, we have to prove these guys wrong. Wasn't there some sort of like atmosphere like that?
Yeah, there definitely was. We definitely isolated ourselves from other teams too, right? So we literally had a strict no girlfriend rule. We had a strict no interacting with other teams rule. Like we kind of like what people talked about.
Didn't you even have some shit in that team at the time? Like you had to like you weren't even allowed to play all the games or something, like you off time or some weird shit like that, right? There was a pretty strict team.
We had half an off day a week, and when we did spend our off time was usually like going out to dinner with the team. So we're kind of like a tight-knit family. And we did have this this fascination with Summoning Inside. So that was definitely there. We did watch it a lot because for us it was, I mean, for me personally, I kind of was really, I needed to know what other people thought of me. I don't know why, but it's just really important to me at the time, right? And when I saw you guys kind of, to my estimation, like, I mean, I remember one conversation about me being like the 9th, 10th best jungler in the league when I was not because I was not ganking, not doing big plays, something like that. And I was like, "There's no way that this is gonna be like what people think." Like, this makes me so mad, and it's like, and it made me personally mad. It made Darius really mad, and we used it as fuel. It really didn't even have that much to do with it. It was just us watching it and becoming mad at it, and it kind of fused us together. I think the whole split was defined by us, as you said, like us against the world. But we had like multiple instances of like us against like not just the world, but then against you guys, like you guys in specifically. Sure. Then we had this whole thing within our team actually, because at some point like we had this division in our team too, which is like what led to. I mean, not just led to, but like why we had Gleep like departing at some point too, that we couldn't really handle him, so we had us against him too. There were a lot of things that were happening. There was always like us against something, but it fused us together. Like especially me, Darius, and Bjergsen became really good friends through that, because we were able to talk about things and talk about like what made us mad today, what was happening today, and we used that as fuel to perform better and better. And I don't know, like it is. I think the setup might have been a bit too harsh for what people consider work-life balance.
Yeah.
But work-life balance doesn't fucking matter if the work that you do is that meaningful. And for us, it felt like a crusade in a way. It felt like a battle that we're going into, and it was a good feeling. It felt like I had comrades, I had people that had my back, they had someone that had their backs, and no matter what happened, we're already prepared for the bads were to come on stage, right? When we got to the LAN events, like when we got to the playoffs, like we were already battle taught by Reggie, and I guess our hatred for the outside, especially for you guys, and nothing could face us anymore. Like being down 2-1 in a series twice didn't face us. Like it just didn't.
You know,
matter.
I've actually had pros. I always say fair play to them if they can admit this privately. I've actually had pros, mainly from obviously my native game of Counter-Strike, where I'm even wilder if people don't know. Like, I don't give a flying fuck in that game. Right? I've had pros who just told me, though, like, behind the scenes, like, initially they used to be mad at me for the first year or two. But then they even said later, not only did they get the idea that, look, it is entertainment, but more importantly, they even said, like, I'll even give you credit, like, it did make it more fun to if I proved you wrong. Like, if you said I wouldn't win this tournament or would lose this game, they said, actually, that, like, added a bit more spice. It was, they can, it's like you. They reframed it and just made it like another thing. Like that's another person to overcome and prove them wrong, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. Like, for us, it was the same thing. And for me, I mean, it didn't stop until like basically season 6, actually end of season 5 when I had a talk with Monte at Worlds, when it's actually just, I like the way you guys are playing. You know, I'm like, all right, well, you know, like also that was with Origin, right? Different team, but
yeah.
So like, you know, then for me the feud was over to a certain extent. But before that, like, there was such a I had a real bone to pick. Like, it was pretty intense for me. I mean, I guess also because there was a lot of things happening at the same time, like all the TSM fans kind of being a bit too critical of me, and then I don't know, like me being in a different country. So I never had the support staff that other people had in the game, right? Like, I had my parents, and I talked about them like already like a bit, that they were there when I was in Europe. But as soon as I went to North America, that support system for me was like gone. You know, like I couldn't really interact with them. They're a bit on the older side, so they didn't really have the understanding of like esports. They didn't have the understanding. They tried as much as they could, but I had to almost formulate a persona for me. Like, when people talk about, or when Kobe talked about himself, like a Black Mamba or whatever it is, like in my head, I had to make this kind of same thing happen. Obviously, I'm not saying that I'm comparable, whatever. I'm just saying that I had to make the same thing happen in my head, where I had to make a persona up that was kind of cold-blooded, harsh, and took everything to heart, and just like made sure that whatever fuel I'm getting, I'm making into hatred, and then I'm gonna make sure to beat other people. And that was like kind of my persona at the time, and really, it did help that I had no shortage of haters, and we didn't have a shortage of haters. That was good. So I guess thank you for that, yeah.
As you said, in this particular playoff run as well, this one was an epic one. Because do people even forget, even the round against Dignitas, like Dignitas was even threatening you early in those games. Like every single series, all 3 best of 5s, you were in positions where it's like maybe the other team could have won or would have won. Like this was a really, like, it must have been a really exciting run. Like it feels like it's out of a movie or something, this playoff run.
It was intense. I mean, we're third place. Somehow we made it third place, right, in the end of the split. And then we had Dignitas, who was 3-1 against us. During the split, so we had a negative win record against the 6th seeded team. So we played them first game, we win, but then we hard lose in the late game. Second game, complete banger. We had a failed backdoor, and I had to then like do the real backdoor and like kind of win the game for us. And then the series turned, but every single game was besides game 4 was harshly fought. And then against LMQ, who, like, in the regular season, they were the best team, right?
Yes, everyone behind the scenes said they were the real best team, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were the first seed too. So we had to, as third seed, go first seed in LMQ, beat them 3-2, like in a very, very, very close series where at some point I think No Name just broke apart or whatever it is, but it had. I mean, I guess, we just played very well and punished all of his mistakes, similar to how we did to Crumbs in the series before that. And then we had to finally go through C9, who has never lost a game in their lives up to that point. And they gave us Alistar for one game, which kind of fueled our like hope that we were going to beat them. And game 5, when we played it, is we gave up Nasher. We're down. We gave up bot inhib, and I knew we were kind of down like maybe 4 to 5k. I thought in my head. And then we have this insane team fight where people say it's lucky from Turtle that he crit a couple of times. Yeah, might have been, but I think maybe would have won the team fight anyway. But it's like every single play of that game was basically like past like 20 minutes was game winning or game losing. Like every single play. And I don't think. I mean, how to put this? If we would replay that playoffs again, with the same kind of players and whatever it is, and with the same kind of people at the time, we might not win again. You know, it was so like it was not lucky, but it was we hit our form at the right time in the right moments, and we had the clutch plays in the right moments. Like people did the most they could with what they had at the time. Like And I don't know, like it's to me still my favorite playoff run, also my only championship. I guess that's why it's my favorite playoff run. But it had so much in it that all the players like became, I don't know, it's like again like the better theme kind of, but I grew a lot closer with Bjergsen at the time, and we became like really battle hardened, and we knew we were gonna make it to Worlds after the LQ series, and afterwards it was just like pure enjoyment to a certain extent. Yeah, like winning that championship and going to Worlds was pure enjoyment.
Yeah, I have actually a two-part question along those lines, which is one, as you say, you became a champion this moment. Like, what is the moment like when you actually realise I'm a champion? Then two, I wondered actually if it had some effect on your relationship with Bjergsen, because people have to remember this was his first championship too.
It was. I felt like it felt like a long time. It didn't feel like a long time. How to put this? It felt like that we're meant to be there, so it was not that surprising that we're there. But yet we won those series in such a way that it was surprising, despite us winning like almost every scrim throughout the end of the split. But when I lifted that trophy and like kind of felt how heavy it was really surreal. And having like 3,000 people cheer TSM and like looking at you it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable feeling. It has, like, I've won other championships in terms of IEMs and whatever, but none compared to the love that you get once you have that LCS trophy, I would say. And for me, with Bjergsen, the relationship, like, I mean, I obviously distance myself over time, and we distance ourselves over time, but it is a different thing to have the kids that played NorthCon against one another, like played a Dreamhack with one another, whatever it is, or against one another. And then you suddenly like are playing in the NALCS finals, and you lift that trophy. It's man, oh man, and be in the same room, like we're in the same room in Seattle when we played the finals, and we're in the same room in Korea, like man, and then in Taiwan too. Like we really, he's 2 years younger than me, and it always felt like older brother, younger brother relationship. But he was so cerebral that I never felt like that he was younger than me in terms of his mental age. He was always on the same level. So I don't know, it was just interesting to spar with him throughout that entire split and throughout the entire playoff run, because he was so intellectually profound compared to a lot of the other players at the time that you don't have any conversation with him, like, or I don't know, like press toilet buttons and see how high the bidet flies, whatever it is. Like I don't know how to put this, but like you get the idea,
Sure.
Like it was quite profound for me, like to just have that kind of friendship coming in, like with a player, because I didn't have that before.
Right, when you went to Worlds, obviously this is another thing that was infinitely memeable for some of the insight. You obviously famously had that line where it's like, not only, like, if people don't know, TSM finished second in the group below the Starhorn Royal Club team, and as a result you had to play Samsung White, who everyone knew at the time was the best team in the world, in the first round of the playoffs. So like realistically, you were just never going to win that series. Like no one could beat Samsung White at the time, basically, as we saw. Even their fucking sister team got dusted off by him. But you famously said the line that you thought if you'd have won the group and made it on the other side, because you'd have had like we now know all Chinese path to the final, you actually think you could have been in the final. So like, I know part of this, because people are going to be like, you disagreed, Thorin, though, you did a video about that. Yeah, but that's because I'm only judging on the games that I saw in the server. The thing people have to always understand about pros is you have all the scrims, and at Worlds, obviously you scrim against other people, you play people sometimes in your group, like, like what the scrim is like versus the real game, what you plan to do versus what happens. So give me the spiel then. What went wrong at this Worlds that could have gone differently and been better for TSM? Give me your take.
I mean, week 1, we had the first 3 games, we had pretty good showings against SK because they played with Gilias, and then we had a really good showing against CPA. When we played against Sun Royal Club, like before the game, we were too relaxed. We're really relaxed about like playing them, because we saw them struggle against SK, and we murdered SK, right? Like we beat them 20 minutes, they FF'd. Then we played against Sun Royal Club, and we're like, easy money, whatever it is. And we completely botched the draft. Like we play Elise into Rengar. Rengar was at the time like a unknown pick. People played it, but it was only Dandy and a bit of Insect.
Yes,
but it was not really widely played, right? So
no one in the West played it pretty much.
Yeah, but we knew that they had it in their arsenal, because we did have that information, like that a lot of people at the time were starting to practice Rengar, and our scrim partner, which was Samsung White at the time, like was playing a lot of Rengar too, like, and at some point you just know that other people are going to try to pick it up. Kind of knew that. So we botch the draft. We play terrible lanes. We play Elise into Rengar. We lose the game. And after the game, we just have this fallout. Like, we talk to one another. We're like, why the fuck did we do that? Why the hell did we draft that way? Like, this should never happen. We shouldn't have been so cocky. And it wasn't even the players being cocky. And I blamed my coaching staff for that, actually quite a bit at the time. I told them, why do you guys think that we can just beat anyone by playing champions we don't want to play, and letting them play champions that they can play? Like, it's just ridiculous. And I even got on a whole tangent about it, because in scrims we had this tier list of champions, obviously, and certain champions that we played in that game against Sun World Cup were not on it, right? So be it, whatever it is, right? Then we have the week 2, we have the game against SK. Game looks pretty bad in the beginning. We dive bottom, we trade like 1 for 3, I think 1 for 2. Then we keep playing. At some point we have the game 1. We run down mid lane based upon a shot call by someone. I think it was Bjergsen who called it, but it doesn't really matter. And we're just really convinced that we could end the game. We get aced and the game is over, right? The game was 1 for us if we just base and we go for it again. So that's it. But that's obviously the stage games we saw, right? The 2 losses that we saw. The behind the scenes was we murdered Samsung Blue in every single scrim. Like, we came to Korea. That was the only time we actually lost a scrim against them. The day after we got to Korea, we went 3-3 against them. Every single time afterwards, we went 6-0. Like, clean sweep. We played against Alliance. Worst case, we went 4-2. Usually 5-1 around these times. Good scrims. We played against. I think we had a couple of scrims against like SK in the beginning. We went, like, when they came to Korea, when they were still like, we kind of aced them. And the only team that could challenge us in scrims was Samsung White, obviously, because they murdered us every single scrim. Besides, like, we had like a 5-30 win rate, I think 5-30. And the only wins we had were like on Lee, when we now played Lee Sin. So we knew that this is going to be a tough one. And the other team was EDG. So EDG was giving us a bit of a fit, but it was not like they were hard to beat, but it was more like 50-50, right? So we were in the 50-50 sense. And I knew that we had it in ourselves to beat every single team in the best of 5, because I saw it in playoffs, right? Like in C9 and against LMQ, whatever it is. So I knew as the series extends that we're going to find solutions to issues. Best of 1, however, was a system that that favored us to a certain extent, but also didn't favor us because we just didn't play as consistent, and we had some games where we just like flat out fucking lost because we were making troll moves. That wouldn't have really mattered in the best of 5. So to me, to this estimation, I think if we played, what the Sound World Club path was, I think they went
EDG, and then it was OMG, and then they were in the final.
If we played against EDG, I think it would have been a coin flip. I think could have been gone either way, 2-3, 3-2, whatever it is. There's no way we're going to lose to OMG ever. And I don't know, that's basically it, right? And we would have not lost to any team besides Samsung White, 100% in the best of 5, and potentially EDG. EDG and Samsung White were the only teams that I can think of that were going to beat us in the best of 5. Royal Club was not a threat to us because we beat them the last game. We felt really comfortable afterwards. And all the other teams were... Samsung Blue was trash. I'm going to say it. Like, they were really bad. People overhype... I mean, you guys say... I guess said the too about, like, C9 being really good or being the best North American team or Western team. Samsung Blue was really, really bad at that words. They were not good. And I say this knowing that obviously the scrim and stage performance was different, but to the point that I thought they were trolling a lot of the times. Like, trolling... But they were taking these games serious. They were not trying to lose or what it is. But Dade was like, Pond could play Katarina and ace people at minute 10, whatever it is, and just soul carry a single game with Jace, Katarina, Talon. He played like the most ridiculous champions, Kassadin, and he solo carried every single game. Pawn on the other hand, Dade on the other hand, he could play one champion, that was Yasuo. Every other champion was really bad upon. Spirit could only play Lee Sin. Hard was a lot worse than Last Boy. Like, Hard was pretty much a dead weight. So I don't know. Like, it might sound like a meme, but I just don't believe that any team besides EDG and Samsung White could have realistically beaten us in the best of 5. And we ended up going against Samsung White, which obviously eliminated us and gave me at least a lot of what if scenarios. Right, we really believed that we're supposed to be in the finals, and I think to this day, had that been a bit more different in terms of the draws, what it is, I think would have made it. I genuinely believe that.
Money doesn't grow on trees, and believe it or not, just watching a video for free with the odd ad doesn't really pay the bills. So thanks to the following people for kindly supporting my work and this particular content. And those people are, of course, Ahmed Hadju, Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Jensen Gore, Kovacevic, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Toucan, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion, my main man. You know what? There are plenty of perks to be found on my Patreon. Like, you can find out who upcoming guests are for my reflections, interviews, and talk shows. You can ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Might get roasted if it's a bit spicy in how you phrase it. You can figure out which pieces of content I might want to do next. I often ask people which they think between certain ideas or for suggestions. You can even take part in one of those long discussions with me about all kinds of esports, whatever's on your mind. So if any of those sound like something that takes your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description below.